Hello again and welcome back to the Faster webinar series. This is the fifth webinar of the series. We're going to be looking at buying a new or used electric vehicle. What do you need to know? And that includes leasing, that includes PCPs, that includes salary sacrifice, incentives, etc. But before that, as is tradition, we'll have a quick update from Donald Monaghan about the Faster project, which of course is installing 73 DC chargers across Republic of Ireland, Northern Ireland, and the rural west coast of Scotland. So Donald, welcome back, and yeah, looking forward to hearing what's been happening this month.
Thank you, Euan, and thank you again to all our panelists that have joined us this evening. I'm sure we're all looking forward to a really great, very interesting and informative discussion around the topic of buying a used or a new electric vehicle. So it's been a busy few weeks for the Faster project. I suppose I'll start off just to give you a bit of an update on where things stand on the procurement side of the project. Last week, our partners Hitrans published the revised tender documents for the procurement exercise in Scotland. So the documents are now live on Public Contracts Scotland, I believe, as well as the official journal of the European Union from today. So invitations out there for any potential providers that can install and maintain the infrastructure in Scotland. So the expectation there is that a provider will be appointed before the end of October, with the contract to begin in November. And that would mean that hopefully everything going to plan, we should see some infrastructure in Scotland early in 2023. In the Republic of Ireland, Louth County Council, who are leading the procurement there, have recently, I think last Friday potentially, launched a tender exercise to appoint a design team who will oversee the development and the installation of the charging infrastructure and the development of the tender documents and the procurement process for the infrastructure. That particular exercise will again close in the next few weeks, and the design team should be appointed again before the end of October. So exciting move forward there. And I know my colleague Michael McGrath from Louth County Council will join the discussion next month, and will be able to give more of an update on that side of the project at that point. In terms of Northern Ireland, Ulster University, again, are working very closely with Louth County Council, and they expect to move forward with a very similar process in terms of appointing the design team within the next month. So again, we will have a further update on how they're getting on over the next month or two. And I know some of the team members from Ulster University will be joining in the December webinar, which will focus on the charging infrastructure in Northern Ireland. So that's really where we are infrastructure-wise. From my end of the project, which really focuses on the communications and public engagement, and it's good to see some familiar names in the webinar this evening. Over the last few weeks, we went live with our first major media campaign for the Faster project. That was developed over the summer with our media partner Crow Group. And really what this campaign focused on were two key messages that we found really resonate best with the general public and with existing EV owners and stakeholders. And that was really around the cost saving potentials from owning an electric vehicle, and also the environmental benefits. And those were the two key messages that came out of the survey research last year. And again, were the two key benefits identified in the survey that we conducted over the summer months, which I'll talk a little bit more about in a moment. So the media campaign went live across all three regions: Scotland, Northern Ireland, and the Republic of Ireland. In press, on radio and on Spotify. We also have a digital element to the campaign with pay-per-click advertising and also Twitter. And also in Scotland, we have some billboards along the west coast of Scotland, and digital screens, ad shells, and all of that. So really big presence for the project over the last number of weeks. Now, unfortunately, following the passing of Queen Elizabeth on Thursday last, all media campaigns have had to be paused. So the campaign was paused on Friday and will go live again following the funeral, I believe next Tuesday. So the campaign activity will resume then. And because I work for Southwest College, and we've also had to put a hold on our communications, our public-facing communications, over the past number of days. So that's why our numbers tonight are a little bit smaller than we normally would have, just as we haven't been able to do as much promotion through our own channels over the past few days as we would normally have done. But anyway, moving on from that, as I mentioned just a few minutes ago, we recently revealed the results of the survey, which we published earlier this summer. Survey was developed by Transport Research Partners in Glasgow and distributed by the Faster project team. And the survey revealed that across the 3 regions, on average, up to 55% of motorists are likely to, or very likely to, opt for a battery electric vehicle for their next car. Now, there were regional differences. In Scotland, we found that up to 78% of respondents there were likely to make the change, in comparison to 54% and 55% of the respondents in both ROI and Northern Ireland. Some of the key benefits again that were cited in the responses were around the environmental benefits of electric vehicles and the cost savings, the ease of driving, driver comfort, and all of that. And some of the key concerns that respondents had were around the battery technology, range, battery recycling, and of course the rising cost of electricity, but not so much in the numbers that we would have probably expected. So it was lower down the pecking order. But again, it is a concern that's coming through. Another concern that was reflected was obviously the purchase price for electric vehicles, and also the supply issues that we're seeing month on month. So some really interesting results, and what I will do is I will pop a link to the article, which has much more information on that, into the chat, and you can have a look at that in your own time. But it also went out via email, I'm sure, to many of you late last week, so you may have already seen that. Finally, I would just draw your attention, if you haven't already watched those, we've published the first 2 of our review films, presented by Euan and Rick Boulemere. The first one was the Honda E review, and that was quickly followed then by a review of the Fiat 500e. And the feedback on both films so far has been really, really positive, and we're delighted with the response to those. So thank you for everybody that's commented and shared those and liked them. It really means a lot to all the team, and we're always delighted to get your comments around those. The next film is a review of the MG5, and that will hopefully go live over the next week or so. So if you keep an eye out on our channels for that one, it'll be a really interesting one, I think. And I've shared a sneak preview with a few of my project colleagues, and yeah, it's got great initial response. So looking forward to sharing that one publicly next week. So I think that's my update for this month. As I mentioned earlier, next month we'll be joined by colleagues from Louth County Council and Dundalk Institute of Technology, and they will really give you, I suppose, a bit more of a flavour of how the infrastructure side of the project is shaping up. So that's really all from me, Euan.
Thank you, Donald. Fantastic update. Very quickly, before we move on to the main course of this evening, if you wish, did you mention that battery recycling was one of the kind of concerns that was mentioned?
Yeah, it did come up quite a few times in the survey responses.
Yeah.
It was one of the main concerns. Again, I don't know whether, you know, people that cited those concerns were existing electric vehicle owners, or whether they were complete novices, or whether they were, you know, industry representatives from the oil industry who I don't know who they were, but it was one of those concerns that did creep in. Just
as soon as you mentioned that, it was like electrochemist mode engaged here, because it is something that, you know, there's just to allay any concerns of anyone in the room. There are over 100 companies working worldwide on state-of-the-art EV battery recycling techniques. They have the capacity to recycle these. They can recycle them at increasingly efficient techniques that use a lot less energy or less nasty chemicals, or both. And they can recover up to 100% of the materials now. And they can even do that economically for next generation chemistries that use less contentious, cheaper, more abundant, and therefore more economically difficult to recycle materials. So it's funny whenever you hear people saying, oh, EV batteries aren't recycled. The other thing is because 99.9% of them have still got loads of life left in them. They're still in EVs being used. It's like someone going into your kitchen, opening the fridge and pointing at a bottle of milk that's got most of it in it and going, you're not recycling that plastic bottle. So yeah, because it's still got milk in it, but it's not being recycled. It's never going to be. It is. Seriously, just calm down. It will get recycled when it needs to be recycled. Exactly. That's basically the story on that one. So I see actually we do have some questions flooding in already in the Q&A. Fantastic to see. They're really good questions. And I have to restrain myself from being like, oh, me, I know the answer to this one, because they are great and I'll make sure we answer them. But we have a panel to answer these questions for us this evening at the end. But before we do, I have a question for you, courtesy of Donald. If you're able to put up our first poll, please. I would like to know, basically, who have we got joining us this evening? Are you an existing EV driver, whether you own it or lease it? Are you a prospective EV driver, occasional, for example, car club EV user? Do you have no plans to drive an EV in the future, or in the near future, I should say? Or are you a retailer of EVs? It'll be interesting to see who we've got joining us today. So hosts and panelists cannot vote on this, but interestingly, apparently I can. That's weird. Anyway, so I think, have we got the results coming through yet, Donald?
Yes. Can you see those?
We've not got the live results yet. No, if you're able to share those for me, please. For some reason, it's not allowing me. Normally does. There we go. That's Zoom for you. Just to gauge a kind of bit of feedback about who we've got with us. Oh, there we go. Quite a few veterans with us today. But crucially, we also have prospective EV drivers who are clearly keen to find out what's best for them. And that is exactly what we plan to do this evening. So at this point, I would like to welcome to the panel, if you could turn on your mics and your cameras, we have Simon Acton from Next EcoCar, who's a specialist used EV retailer in the Republic of Ireland. We have Jim Blair from Arnold Clark, who is basically the godfather of the Innovation Centre in Glasgow, which is an EV experience centre / knowledge centre, and is a very impressive facility and basically full of EV gurus who'll tell you everything you need to know. We have Aaron Callaghan from LeasePlan Ireland, who heads up the EV side of operations for EV leasing, and also the environmental and social governance side of things, so quite neatly tied in together. And we have Elyse Jacks from Energy Saving Trust Scotland as well. So when it comes to Scottish incentives for electric vehicles, then we have everything that we need to know at this point. Welcome, everyone. Great to have you on the panel. So I think, obviously there's two main categories of EV that you would get in terms of anyone here today. There's either going to be a brand new one or a used one. So if we start with new EVs first and foremost, I suppose there's multiple different ways that you can get behind the wheel of one. And the first option would be to buy outright. So, obviously all well and good if you've got the cash up front. In terms of incentives and government grants that are available in Scotland should you wish to buy an electric vehicle outright? Elyse, this is probably your area of expertise, being from Energy Saving Trust Scotland. What incentives do we have available for people buying new outright?
Yeah, absolutely. Unfortunately, for new vehicles, we had a domestic fund last financial year that was not renewed for this financial year, and that was supporting individuals in Scotland, resident in Scotland, to purchase a brand new EV. I will obviously cover our used domestic EV loan that was renewed successfully. Hooray, hooray. So that is still going strong, and we've had so much traction with that. It's incredible. But we do have, I'm not sure if there's any sort of business folks in the audience, but we do have a low carbon transport business loan that was renewed this financial year. And we've actually expanded it a little bit. The criteria does cover hydrogen vehicles, which is something that Energy Saving Trust really hasn't done in the past. We had some interest last financial year and a couple quarters before that, with just businesses kind of expressing interest, and is there anything to kind of support them to purchase those vehicles. So we do have availability for that as well. But yeah, I don't want to get too much into the nitty gritty, because I have a whole list of all like the loan criteria and all of that. But basically, the big loan just now for outright brand new is just through the business stream.
Fair play. But on the plus side, there are incentives, I believe, for some homeowners anyway, or some residents in Scotland, for the other kind of piece of that puzzle, which is a home charge point. So there was one for kind of leafy suburbia, but I believe that the funding has recently been retargeted for more difficult to electrify buildings. Is that correct?
Yeah, so it ties in quite neatly with our used domestic EV loan. So if you're a recipient of that loan, you automatically qualify to receive the charge point grant, which is great. And then we're also trying to target rural residents in Scotland, because obviously there's quite a need in those areas to kind of bring them onto the grid and that sort of thing. So yeah, so that's still going strong there as well. Yeah.
Superb, because that's a good point. A lot of the installers of charge points are towards the central belt, and if you're in the Highlands and Islands, if you're in some of the jurisdiction of the Faster project, then trying to find an installer can be a little bit more difficult, as it would be for finding a plumber or someone to fit a new kitchen or something like that. Unfortunately, it's the nature of the rural kind of nature of the west of Scotland, but right. There are definitely installers who do exist, and will cover those areas. I believe that is it Energy Saving Trust that has the list of approved installers.
We do, yes, yeah, and you can find that on our website. And if anyone's interested in getting that information, I'm happy to share that afterwards. Just let me know. I can give you my email. No worries. But yeah, we definitely have that. Yeah.
Superb. So there are definitely financial incentives available, even if you're buying new, but there's not those incentives. There is for business, as you mentioned, and for used, which we will absolutely come back to in the next section of the webinar. But obviously that's in terms of buying outright in Scotland. So in terms of Northern Ireland, before we go to Republic of Ireland, I noticed that we have a conspicuous absence of representation from Northern Ireland on the panel. But between all of the panelists sort of covering, because Arnold Clark does kind of venture into Northern Ireland as well, does it not, Jim? So are you aware of any incentives that are available in Northern Ireland? I believe that it's not quite as generous as Scotland or the Republic of Ireland at present.
No, to be fair, I'm not aware of anything. We don't really venture into Northern Ireland, although we are in the process of establishing a click and collect centre pretty close to Ireland, and I think we're trying to capture some business from there, but I'm not aware of any grants in Ireland, I'm afraid.
Fair play. You know what? I can almost hear Mark McCall from EVA NI frantically typing away in the chat to correct us if there is anything. But yeah, unfortunately, what we've generally found is Scotland had been very generous. Republic of Ireland had also been very generous as well. Isn't that right? So Aaron and Simon as well. So Aaron more on new leasing and Simon more on used outright. But nonetheless, between you, we'll have all of the details, won't you, in terms of the incentives for buying new outright in the Republic of Ireland?
Yeah, so I suppose if we start with new, in Ireland we like to overcomplicate things. We don't just have a straightforward one solution for grants, but I'll go kind of through and do a bit of a summary if I can. So for all buyers, there is VRT relief available on a new vehicle, and that's up to the value of €5,000. Now that's based on the open market selling price of a vehicle. The open market selling price, just as a rough guide, take the retail price, knock 10% off it. So 90% of the price is really what you're looking at as an open market price. So to get that 5,000 relief, the vehicle has to have an open market price of 40,000 or less. There is a tapered scale that goes up to 50,000, but the grant available reduces the further up that scale you go. And once you get to 50,000, that VRT relief is gone. So that's available to everybody on a new vehicle. For private buyers, then there's also an SEAI grant available, which is an additional €5,000, and that is, it's uncapped. Essentially, it is, it's 5,000. There's no real, thing to take it off it, provided the vehicle value is between 14 and 60,000 euros as an open market selling price. Now it does go below that, but it's tapered, and it can go down to kind of 1,500 euros. But it's essentially, as a private buyer, there's potentially 10,000 euros in grants available on a new vehicle. Slightly different for commercial. We're not as generous to commercial buyers at the moment. There is a grant there, but it's only available to N1 vehicles, which is your light commercial vehicle. So that could be your small or medium van or a caravan that's been converted. What's available there is a grant of 3,800 euro. But unfortunately it's capped by a de minimis funding cap. So essentially any business can avail of up to 200,000 euros, which equates to 52 vehicles, which is generous. But if you're a large company, you could be through that in one go, and it works on a rolling cycle. So once you use your 52, that's it, gone for 3 years. Likewise, if you use 30 year one, you then still have others. So if you're going that route, better to space it out. So that's the 3,800 euro. Both SEI grants can be also applied for through your dealer. You don't have to do that yourself. So essentially, if you're buying direct from a dealer, they can look after all the grant end of things once you tell them that you want to go that route. I don't know why you wouldn't. Who doesn't want to save a bit of money?
True.
Also for businesses, there's the accelerated capital allowances. So if you're buying the vehicle outright, you can get tax breaks also. Something to be considered would be road tax. In Ireland, electric vehicles qualify for the lowest rate of road tax. So passenger vehicles get 120 euros of annual road tax, which is reasonable. Most average vehicles here would be kind of 300 to 400 euros. Your commercial EVs don't really get a reduction unless they're a very light vehicle, which most won't be. So your standard kind of commercial van will still be at the standard 333 euro rate. We also do have grants. I know we're more talking about vehicles, but there is charger grants as well. It's now much more open than it used to be. You don't need a car anymore. You just have to have an electric car to get the grant. Now it's open to anybody. That's a grant of 600 euro. There's also a grants for local authorities. Won't really go into that, but hopefully we would see local authorities installing more public charge points over the next couple of years because of that as well. And there's also an apartment grant scheme been opened as well. So if it's an apartment block with no charging infrastructure currently, the apartment owner can avail of up to 80% of the capital cost in a grant, plus that 600 euro grant. So it's quite generous. And if you're in an apartment block that does have some charging infrastructure, but you don't have access to it, if you then talk to your management company and they're willing to allow you to fit a charger, you yourself can qualify for the 600 euro grant there. The only other thing really then is toll incentives. So you, as a passenger, as a private vehicle, you can get annually a 500 euro rebate back from the toll companies. You have to tell them and register. You don't automatically get it. But 500 euro is quite reasonable. And if you're a commercial operator, it's up to 1,000 euros. So, and that's per vehicle. So it's worth looking into that. There is obviously BIK things for company vehicles, but I think we'll touch on that in a later segment as well. But that should be a fairly good summary of what's available on new vehicles. Yeah,
and now anyone who's not watching from Republic of Ireland is intensely jealous because that is some seriously impressive incentives. Although actually you do raise a good point about road tax or vehicle excise duty, because unless I'm mistaken, it's a UK-wide thing to have free, well, basically zero VED on your car, so zero car tax. Am I right in saying though, Jim, that there's a luxury car tax? So if your electric vehicle's above, is it £40,000, you do pay some VED for the first kind of couple of years, but then you don't, so it's still free. It's just as that kind of luxury tax on top of that. Is that right?
Yeah, you've got an expensive car supplement of, I think it's £330, £340 a year.
Yeah.
If the car is over £40,000 in value.
Fair play. But I mean, that is really kind of opened my eyes as to how generous the Republic of Ireland incentives are. Actually, that was incredibly comprehensive. Thank you, Aaron. Obviously, there will be some of those incentives, no doubt, that will apply to used EVs as well. When we come on to that segment, Simon, it will very much be your chance to shine on that. So I suppose actually a good question coming back to yourself, Jim, is are there any dealer specific or brand specific incentives that are available? Because something I have seen occasionally is, for example, we've touched upon grants towards installing a charge point on your house, but am I right in saying that there are some manufacturers and some dealers who provide a free charge point installation with a brand new vehicle that's bought from you, or for example credit for public charging networks if you can't have a charge point installed at home because you don't have off-street parking, for example?
Yeah, it really depends on the time of year you're in. These kind of offers come and go. Sometimes, historically, people like Vauxhall and Volvo, Renault springs to mind as well, where there have been sort of bundle offers. So that they'll maybe you buy a new car, you get a bundled point unit as part of the deal. At the minute, I'm not sure there's any bundled offers available. I think the Vauxhall scheme has gone, but we're going through a little bit of a transition in automotive at the minute. The manufacturers are clearly struggling to supply cars, and as a result, these kind of incentives are not really appropriate when your availability of a car is really the main issue right now. And as a result, some of these offers have just disappeared for the moment. I think they'll come back. Perhaps we'll talk about availability later on, but I think once availability is better, then these kind of incentives, I think, will play a part. But right now, as far as new is concerned, manufacturers are selling as many as they can make. They can sell them 2-3 times at the minute because they simply can't make enough. So the incentives are really not necessary right at the minute.
True, that's a good point, actually. And on that note, Simon, have you seen any kind of free charge points if you buy such and such incentives in the Republic of Ireland at the moment? Or is it a similar story of they've been kind of pulled temporarily?
I wouldn't really be that close to what's available on the new car side, but I mean, there certainly were a number of manufacturers offering free charges. I think VW were definitely doing that at some stage, but I don't know if they are currently. I mean, I'd be inclined to agree with Jim. I mean, yeah, new cars don't seem to, there's no problem for dealers selling them. So I would imagine that a lot of those incentives have been pulled because, yeah, supply is the main issue.
True. And in fact, what I would say to anyone watching is that if it was me, bearing in mind how much you're spending on the car, whether or not you're getting a free charge point with it shouldn't really influence your decision on which vehicle to go for. Make sure you go for the vehicle that is right for you, and then get the charge point that's right for you on top of that. But if you're getting a free one with the one you wanted anyway, then that's a bonus, I suppose. But obviously that's in terms of people coming along to a dealer to buy a new car with a suitcase full of cash, which obviously doesn't happen every day. But I believe that one of the more popular ways to avail of an electric vehicle these days is PCP. So again, coming back to yourself, Jim, because I believe that you will be a veteran of selling vehicles on PCP. Tell us what it stands for and how it works.
Yeah, it's one of these kind of Marmite products as PCP. It's become incredibly popular over the last, I guess, 20 years or so, maybe more. In the leasing side of the business, we talk about PCH, which is personal contract hire. But typically when a consumer buys a car in a showroom, it's a personal contract purchase, PCP. And fundamentally, the principle is that you take maybe a 30 grand motor car, you kind of say to the dealer what you think your annual mileage is going to be, and they'll give you what they call a guaranteed future value. So let's say £30,000, and after 3 years with X thousand miles on it, it's going to be worth, let's say, £15,000. And what PCP does is effectively treats that as a final payment. So your monthly instalments on a PCP are effectively £15,000 plus your interest. So it's become popular because people appreciate that much lower monthly instalment. The controversial part of PCP is whether people are properly aware that they actually never really own that car until they make that final future value payment. And the reality is that most folk in our experience don't. They simply use that as a trade-in to their next car, and so it continues from one car to the other. But PCP is incredibly popular for consumers these days. The vast majority of the cars that we will sell are on PCP. I think historically there were some issues with people getting into sort of negative equity situations, but that legislation is really taking care of that now. So dealers are really have to be very, very aware of people's financial situation, and we're not allowed to sell to people if they get into a negative equity situation. So you can have much more confidence now in PCP, and it is a genuine way to minimise your monthly outgoings because you're paying against a much smaller amount. But you do have that big payment at the end if you want to retain the car.
That's a good point. So you've actually, you've hit upon a really interesting point where I'd like to bring in Aaron here, because of course, well, lease plan, the clue's in the name, but I suppose that a PCP, as you say, is effectively a lease with the option to buy at the end, although the way that lease is worked out will be somewhat different possibly. But in terms of leasing, presumably there's not the option to buy at the end, is there? But the rates, the monthly rates can be quite competitive. Tell us more about the leasing side of things then, Aaron. Is that a fair kind of comparison? And then, obviously more on the kind of leasing side for EVs in general.
Yeah, fairly similar in a way, I suppose, to the PCP, but without the option to purchase at the end. So like PCP, it is actually a finance product. So you are borrowing an amount of money and you are paying interest on that money as well. I suppose the main difference is, from a leasing point of view, leasing companies tend to take a little bit more risk on the residual value of the vehicle. So that example that Jim had there, where on a PCP, the value on the vehicle after the 3 years maybe 15,000. On a lease, it could be a bit higher. We could be saying, it might be 18, might be 20,000. The difference is, obviously, in a PCP, you're tied up with that minimum future value at the start. On a lease, there is no future value to kind of play with. So it can be slightly cheaper in that regard. But I suppose, really where it differs is the amount that you're borrowing. And then I suppose the services that you can add on to that as well. So the finance end is one thing, but when you're leasing a vehicle, you can add on pretty much an infinite amount of services. So for your single monthly payment, you can have your finance, you can include full maintenance in that. Tires, replacement car, roadside assistance, your road tax, your annual vehicle testing when the vehicle gets down in age a bit more, telematics, vehicle tracking, insurance. We also include your EV charging infrastructure. We can include that in your lease as well. Fuel can be included as a service. We don't include it in the monthly payment because obviously it's different for everybody. It's not really something you can budget for. And obviously your fleet management end of things as well. So that's obviously more fleet related, but if you have a large fleet, we can manage the fleet for you as well. But I suppose the underlying thing is, for one monthly payment, you can cover all your motoring costs in that one payment. I suppose why would you do it and incentivize, particularly on EVs? You obviously have that VRT relief that can be applied. Obviously lower on the CO2 when it's a fleet, certainly lower fuel costs. I'm not sure what fuel costs in the UK are like at the moment, but we're kind of at €1.95 a litre here at the moment. Versus, if you're on a good night rate for charging, 9 cents a kilowatt, so you can charge a car for €4 to €6. Obviously lower BIK, we'll come back to that again. Lower maintenance costs is a big one. That's something we've been watching for quite a while, and we have quite a lot of electric vehicles on the road from our fleet now. We have a total fleet of about 23,000 vehicles, and we have about 3,000 electrics within that at the moment. And some of those are commercial fleets, some of them are private, so we're keeping a good eye on that. And I suppose the other thing with leasing is you have the option to extend towards the end of the lease as well. If you really like that vehicle, you don't want to change, you're happy with your payments, you can look at extending that, up to 5 years, 6 years in some cases, providing the mileage isn't going, that the vehicle's not going to look like an airplane with the mileage that's on it. And I suppose the other thing is it opens a lot more vehicles to people that maybe couldn't get a particular vehicle. As you said, like not everybody has the big suitcase of money to go in and buy the car that they want, but it opens a lot more vehicles, particularly on electrics now, and there's a lot more choice there. Even just if we look at commercial vehicles now, at the moment on our system, we would be able to quote on 154 different commercial electric vehicles and 260 electric passenger vehicles. So it's a very big pool of vehicles that's available now, far from just your Leaf and your BMW i3 of maybe 4, 5, 6 years ago.
Yeah, it's definitely been an explosion in the number of EVs that are on the market, and then the various different trims of those EVs and so on. That's a really good point. But I hadn't quite appreciated that there are leasing options that are as comprehensive as that. Although that said, it does kind of ring a bell. There is, I suppose, a slight difference from a more kind of conventional lease, even if it's a kind of comprehensive one like that. I've seen car subscription services. So obviously this is talking about the competition here, but you do get the likes of Onto, who will have a rolling monthly subscription, which unless I'm mistaken, does tend to work out more per month than a PCP or a lease, but then gives you the option to swap your EV for another one as you see fit. I think there's some people who genuinely basically use it as an excuse to pretend that they're on top gear and just go through a different EV every month, trying them all out, driving them quite extensively. There's definitely a couple of people on the Twitters who do that, but there is that option too, if you want to dip your toes in the water. But on the flip side of the coin, if you want to save money and dip your toes into the water, do definitely swing by Jim's place at Arnold Clark Innovation Centre, Glasgow, and you can test drive all of the new, well, pretty much every new EV on the market for free. It is a fantastic facility and an ability to kind of test everything in the same place. But
I mean, it's interesting, Euan, sorry to interrupt, but
yeah, sure.
Subscription again is I'm going to use this word marmite again. It's just one of these products that is becoming very, very popular. But as a totally personal view here, I cannot convince myself that encouraging people to change their car every 3 months is what should be described as sustainable transport. To me, it's like taking the worst of, my kids want to change their phone as soon as they can get out of the contract. They change their phone every year, even though there's nothing wrong with that phone. And I already think that's quite wasteful, but translating that into a car environment and encouraging people to change cars every 3 months, I'm not so sure that's such a good idea. Which is a wee bit like a turkey vote for Christmas. We would want to sell as many cars as we want, but the truth of the matter is, from a personal perspective, I'm just not sure that that's such a good idea. I don't know if anybody else has got any thoughts on that.
I think that's a fair point. I mean, my understanding is that the EVs that would be returned onto or whoever the subscription service is would then possibly be released to someone else. But nonetheless, I suppose you're generating an artificially high amount of demand for EVs rather than just sticking with one for a longer period of time. So yeah, you do raise a good point, especially if everyone wants to try one particular EV at the same time and then chop and change at the same time to another one, and you end up again with that kind of higher amount. But before we move on to used EVs, because they do exist and they seem to be doing pretty well. So as was kind of briefly alluded to, obviously there are the VRT incentives, etc., in the Republic of Ireland, and unfortunately UK-wise, there were incentives that have been kind of curtailed now with regards to electric vehicle grants. But for leasing or PCPing, certainly in the Republic of Ireland, that kind of VRT grant is still factored into those monthly costs, is it? So the consumer kind of sees that benefit, or does it not apply if a leasing company has procured that vehicle to then lease?
Now, the VRT reduction applies regardless of the purchaser.
Yeah.
But it's the SEAI grant that doesn't necessarily apply.
Cool. Yeah.
Yeah, so obviously it depends on the vehicle you're going for. VRT relief is essentially applied at source. No, you'd never pay it. It's not like you have to pay it and get it back. It's just not included. And now, unfortunately, it doesn't change the retail price of the vehicle. The retail price is the retail price, but it just means the actual invoice price that you pay is less than what the retail price advertised is.
Fair point. Well, I hope that that's given everyone a good indication of the new EV market and how you can get your hands on an EV there. There is another way that we'll come to later on. But before we move on to the used market, it's time for our second poll of the evening. So this is a question for drivers of new EVs. How did you get your hands on your electric vehicle? Did you purchase it outright? Did you purchase it outright with a loan, which was separate to the company that you bought it from? So, basically taking out a third-party loan or a government grant loan, which, well, Elyse will be discussing that for used EVs in a minute, but there was one for new EVs back in the day. PCP, lease salary sacrifice, will come to, company cars will come to, and then of course subscription service, which is that kind of rolling monthly contract. Donald, I think we're ready to share the results. So let's see what the most popular is. Oh, wow, cash up front is actually surprisingly high up, but outright purchase with a loan, I'm guessing that quite a lot of the respondents there will have been from Scotland, because Transport Scotland / Energy Saving Trust Scotland did have a loan initially up to, I think it was £50,000 back in the day. 6-year interest-free loan towards buying a new EV. That gradually got reduced and has now been taken away for new EVs. But now, of course, we have options in the used electric vehicle market, and we have for some time. So I suppose the first question would be for Simon, who's got 2 thumbs and sells used EVs? This guy. On you go. Oh, missed opportunity there. But so yeah, Simon, you've been in the used EV game for some time, haven't you?
Yeah, I mean, I started my business, it's nearly 5 years ago now. It's hard to believe. So yeah, back in the autumn of 2017. And I guess at that time there were fairly limited options in terms of what we might consider offering. The original sort of Nissan Leaf, the 24 kilowatt cars, predominantly, the Renault Zoes and the BMW i3, and those were kind of the mainstay for quite some time, to be honest. And I guess in more recent times, we've kind of moved on to the newer model Nissan Leafs, continued with the BMW i3s, and things like some of the Hyundai models, like the Ioniq has been, the original Ioniq has been very popular, very efficient car as well. So yeah, lots of good options. And I suppose, being based in Republic, we've been faced by the unique challenges that Brexit brought us, just over 18 months ago now. So it's become a lot harder, because I used to import probably 95% of the cars from the UK, and that has reduced massively because of the restrictions that's brought in terms of VAT and customs duty and logistics and so on. So yeah, but there are options available for used EVs. Prices are up considerably from probably a year and a half, 2 years ago. I'm seeing, like, even things like the original Nissan Leaf 24 kilowatts, which you could probably get a pretty good one for sort of €8,000 upwards. Maybe a year and a half ago, those sort of cars are now going for 12,000-13,000. It's amazing to see, but yeah, also quite frustrating for people who want to get into a used EV, because looking at spending more upfront than they would have done to get that benefit from driving a more sustainable vehicle.
That's the point I was going to say. When you mentioned that in the early days of the business, it was the 24 kilowatt hour Leaf, the 22 kilowatt hour Renault Zoe, the original 60 ampere hour i3. But presumably, you still see quite a lot of those in your business, and presumably they're all still doing really well on the battery front. They're still mechanically solid.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I suppose at this stage, you're probably, in terms of the Nissan Leafs, starting to kind of steer away from the original, pre 2013 cars, the Gen 1 cars, because they had a inferior battery chemistry. There are still some good ones around, but they're getting harder to find with good battery health. But yeah, I mean, there are still plenty of 2013, 2014 onwards original Gen 1.5 Leafs, if you like, that still have pretty good battery health, 10, 11, 12 bars, even in some cases you can still find them. So yeah, they're standing up pretty well.
True, and it's worth pointing out from an electrochemical perspective that the Leaf arguably has the worst design battery pack on the market because it has no active cooling. The original Japanese-built Leafs that you mentioned pre-2013, the chemistry, as you mentioned, wasn't very good, so that meant that the heat kind of built up and they degraded a bit quicker. Whereas when they started building them in Sunderland, the easiest way to tell is because most of them have black interior rather than cream. Some do have cream though. So the way you tell them apart is that the handbrake is actually a foot pedal where the clutch would have been, rather than an electric handbrake thing in the center of the center console between the seats. That's how you easily tell the Japanese, so the electric handbrake versus the Sunderland built, which is the foot handbrake or parking brake, if that makes sense. Crucial thing, as you alluded to, Simon, the chemistry is considerably better and it does last longer. I bought my 2014 Sunderland Leaf for £8,000 in 2016. In 2010, it was worth £10,000 already because the prices were going like that. They then kind of came down again, and annoyingly, I sold it for £8,000 with an extra 40,000 miles on it. Still had 12 bars earlier this year, and I could have easily got £10,000 again for it just now. Just what you're saying about the prices going up in general, but there is demand for these, and they are genuinely holding up, and mechanically they're indestructible as well. But I mean, that's so basically anyone who's looking for even an older kind of runabout electric vehicle, then provided that you're avoiding the pitfalls of the original Japanese built Leafs with the kind of poorer chemistry, generally speaking, if you're going for a Zoe, an i3, anything like that onwards, you should be all right then.
Yeah, I mean, looking at Renault Zoes in particular, the battery seemed to stand up incredibly well, and that's not just necessarily relying on what the dealers are telling you. I mean, I've been using some diagnostic software equipment recently, which allows you to do a test over a full cycle on the battery. And yeah, that's showing that they're standing up incredibly well. And as you say, I mean, the BMW i3s as well, they seem, I think BMW even came back, and they originally had offered a 5-year warranty on the battery, and they extended that to 8 years. So that shows you the level of confidence that they actually had in those cars. And yeah, I haven't seen any bad ones, to be honest. I mean, and like you say, the Leaf in particular stands up very well mechanically. I mean, there's a few things worth looking for if you are buying used, like front wheel bearings can go after a while. There was a generation of the cars that had a sort of an issue with the rear tracking, which can actually be resolved through a kit, which will have been fitted on a lot of cars. And it's just worth checking for sort of irregular tire wear on the rear tires. That's a flag for that sort of thing. But yeah, in general, they hold up incredibly well. And yeah, the Zoe is I would say a less well-built car than the Leaf, but it's still a very good runaround car. And if you're not doing more than 100 kilometers a day, which many people don't, and I'm still driving a 22 kilowatt Leaf Zoe day to day at the moment, which I'll probably charge like once or twice a week. It's it can be all the car you need, or as a second car, it can be a perfect toe in the water to electric driving.
Superb. And actually, you've beautifully illustrated a point that I did have to ask the panel, which is what to look for in a used EV dealer, because in terms of just that knowledge of the different EV makes and models, the specific things to look out for in them, and whether they have been addressed on that particular vehicle, like for example the rear tracking kit, and then even things like knowing whether a Nissan Leaf came with a 3.3 kilowatt or a 6.6 kilowatt onboard charger, because that halves the time it takes to charge your car at home. And then, of course, there were some entry-level Nissan Leafs, which, when they started building them in Sunderland, which didn't have rapid charging. And that confused people when they went for the cheapest Leaf they could find and then got a nasty surprise that it takes hours to charge rather than minutes. But that granularity of knowledge is absolutely key. So in Republic of Ireland, obviously, Simon, you are the used EV guru. Annoyingly, we were meant to be joined today by your equivalent in Scotland, Jonathan Porterfield from EcoCars, but unfortunately he sent me a message about half an hour before we were due to go live. He's fallen ill, so that's a real shame. Jonathan, we're asking for you. Hope you make a speedy recovery, because I've bought my used EVs through him for good reason. But obviously, there are dealers out there, used car dealers, who might not have a clue. They'll be reluctantly selling an EV. They don't really understand the guts of it. But then again, there are purveyors of new and used EVs who are actively training their staff on what to look out for and those kind of particular intricacies of every make and model. So, Jim, what's Arnold Clark doing in terms of the used EV sales side of things and the kind of staff awareness and training?
Yeah, I mean, I think the education part of it for us is just absolutely crucial, and that was one of the reasons that we created the innovation centres, not only to make the public more aware of electric vehicles, but also as a facility where we could bring our own staff and train our own staff. I think people are right to be a little bit concerned as we go through this transition. Most of the focus in terms of training sales personnel tends to come from new car manufacturers about new cars, new electric vehicles. And I think in the used car environment, there's still a little bit of concern that there's a bit of a knowledge gap there, because of course a used car salesperson could be dealing with 30 or 40 different manufacturers, and therefore having all of that knowledge in somebody's head is quite a challenge. So we're still grappling with that, to be fair. We're putting people through a variety of training courses through our training centres at GTG in Glasgow, Edinburgh and Wolverhampton. I think, as time passes, that will get better, but I'm sure we're going to slip up. It's inevitable. I think it's a pretty complex topic, unfortunately, and it's not really the same as just selling a petrol and diesel vehicle. I think in the after sales side, again, we're ramping up our training significantly. In the leasing side of the business, all of our fleet controllers are now EV level 3 trained, and we're going through that exercise in all of our workshops. Again, making sure that people are trained to the appropriate level. But it's a journey. We are not there yet, and we wouldn't claim to be there. It's part of our plans is just as electric vehicles become more popular, we need to ramp things up. And if you go back a couple of years, we were probably, I remember actually going to see Fraser Crichton at Dundee City Council, and he was winding me up when he said, "Jim, do you realise that I've got more level 3 technicians in my workshop than you have in yours?" And he was absolutely dead right at the time. So we're all on this journey, and I think it'll take some time before we get there, but significant investment in retraining of people. There is the NFDA electric vehicle approved scheme, which again we take part in. So again, I think the purpose of that is so that people can have a lot more confidence when they go into a dealership. If you got that badge, then it means you've achieved a minimum level of certification. So yeah, we're getting there, both on the sales side and the after sales side. But I think it will take some time.
But nonetheless, that is very promising to hear that such a large organization is taking that initiative and taking those steps. But when it comes to getting your hands on a used EV, of course, you can turn up with a suitcase full of cash if you want. But at least in Scotland, I believe that there is a way that you can spread your payments without having to pay anything in addition to what you would have spent on the car if you'd bought it outright with cash up front.
Yep, that's exactly right. So we've got our used domestic EV loan. So that's for residents based in Scotland. And then we've got one for businesses as well. The domestic loan is interest-free. It's repayable over 5 years, and it can cover electric cars, vans, motorcycles, and mopeds. And that's obviously all used vehicles. The total funding in the pot for individuals is £30,000 for electric cars or vans, and for motorcycles or mopeds it's £5,000, and that also matches sort of the max listed price of those vehicles or the purchase vehicle, so it can't be above £30,000 in terms of cost. And then there are some caveats obviously in our criteria. One that I find kind of interesting, just talking about dealerships and kind of how to find an accredited dealership or one that has a lot of knowledge, going back kind of with our historic sort of precedence with our criteria for dealerships and our loans, the vehicle had to be purchased from a sort of traditional brick and mortar dealer based in the UK, where the sales are in person or on their online platform. And it had to be accredited by motor ombudsman or part of a trade association signed up to the National Conciliation Service. And that is still true with our criteria. However, we have added a little bit onto there just because the used EV market is sort of growing quite a bit. There are obviously more sort of online sales and online dealerships kind of popping up like Cinch and Kazoo. So we have added that to as a criterion where an individual can go via Cinch or Kazoo, or basically a dealer that is operating solely online, that has an up-to-date online presence, owns the vehicles that they're selling, has reputable customer support services, and also is very transparent in terms of outlining the vehicle's age, battery capacity, mileage, and exterior and interior condition on any sale documents they're providing to the customer. So it's been an interesting kind of journey with that. I think because it's quite a new bit to our criteria, we're kind of learning as we go, and kind of seeing how that's working for customers. Obviously, we don't necessarily have a relationship with online dealerships because it's all very fresh. So there was obviously some bumps in the road, kind of informing them about the loan and our process. And that sort of touches as well on the point that Jim was talking about with training dealers, training dealerships and training sales folks on selling EVs. I think because we have had our loans in place for EVs for some time now, we've obviously been able to develop those relationships with dealerships and making sure that they're informed of how the loan process works, which then obviously hopefully kind of is a bit of a domino effect with regards to kind of spreading the news a bit more about sort of more sustainable transport. And so yeah, it's been an interesting process on that point, but yeah, that's basically it for the used EVs. There's a couple of sort of limitations. It can cover an ex-demo vehicle if that's something you're after, but it has to be over 1,000 miles on the dashboard and older than 6 months. And the funding is only covering your standard spec, so it's not going to cover any extras or add-ons or anything like that. And if you're going to apply the domestic route as an individual, you can't currently own a pure EV.
Good to know.
Yeah, so and the used EV business loan is pretty similar to our the business loan in terms of new business loan in terms of criteria, but it's also interest-free, repayable over 5 years. Additionally, covers used cars, vans, motorcycles, mopeds, and obviously the pot of funding for that is a bit bigger. For limited companies, it's £90,000. Partnerships or sole traders, it's 75. And there is a cap on that as well for listed price. So for cars and vans, it can't be above 30,000, and that includes VAT, and that goes the same way for motorcycles or mopeds, and it can't be over 5,000. So yeah, that's kind of it in a nutshell. But it's a very popular loan. Definitely the used EV domestic loan. When we were talking about vehicles, Nissan Leaf is still probably one of the more popular models coming through. Again, the sort of original models, and then the newer sort of post 2013, 2014 ones. And Renault Zoe is still coming out strong as well. So yeah.
That doesn't surprise me. I mean, the Leaf is the affordable one, I suppose,
yes.
In terms of the value for money on it. But very quickly, in terms of so it's not just your kind of brick and mortar dealers. You mentioned Kazoo, etc., being included within the the used EV loan now. Does that also include eco cars? Because the great irony was that, of course, being an online dealer, Jonathan, I'm going to fight his corner in his during his illness. I shall fight his corner because he'd been unfairly excluded because of the kind of brick and mortar rule. Is he officially, or is EcoCars officially back in the game on that one then?
I'm not sure. Obviously, we can't sort of like point to a specific dealer. We tried to add to the criterion just something that was a bit of a catch-all. But we had to be a bit careful. Obviously, we can't really take a loan. We can't offer a loan for someone who's doing like a person-to-person sale. So Auto Trader is a big no-no, really. I'm not quite sure if I can see, I can check. But yeah, so I mean, yeah, they could be considered. I mentioned Kazoo and Cinch because those are the big ones that we've gotten so far from folks. But yeah, so it'll be interesting to see as they come in. Obviously, we kind of go back and forth with Transport Scotland just to kind of see, is this okay? Have we hit the mark on this? Have we not? And it's kind of an ongoing thing, but yeah.
Good to know, though. Thank you very much. So that's incentives for used EVs in Scotland. We can very quickly cover the incentives for used EVs in Northern Ireland. But in terms of the Republic of Ireland, Simon, what incentives are there available at the moment?
Similar.
Oh, fair enough.
Yeah, I mean, you can, as Aaron said, I mean, you can avail of the charger grant and things like that. But I mean, that's been the case for quite some time now. But yeah, in terms of incentives for actually helping you purchase a used EV, there's currently nothing. I mean, that's something when I was with the Irish EV Owners Association that I spent quite some time lobbying CAI and the Department of Transport for some movement on. It's something that I continue to do. But yeah, we need to grow the fleet, which means that, you know, it would be helpful if we could get past that Brexit thing and get some imports in from the UK, and any incentives which would help bring those costs down would definitely help with that. So I think there is a place for incentives for used EVs, because we don't want to disenfranchise people who have less money to spend on a car. It should be a just transition to electric vehicles rather than just for the people that can afford to spend 30 or 40 grand on a new car.
Yeah, well said. And I think it's clear with Energy Saving Trust Scotland and Transport Scotland that is the direction that's been taken now. The Transport Minister, Michael Matheson, said back in, I think it was 2019, 2018, a couple of years ago anyway, that EVs must not be a middle-class pastime. You know, there must be that, you know, kind of closing of social equality, so that we can make sure that this is accessible to everyone. Everyone who needs it, I should say. Although that said, there was also a push towards trying to encourage more active travel and to encourage more public transport. And very quickly, Elyse, I believe that there is an e-bike loan, isn't there?
Yeah, so we've got a business e-bike loan and domestic e-bike loan for individuals. And we'll start with the domestic. So it covers up to £6,000 to fund up to 2 e-bikes. And that's capped at 3,000 each. One cargo, family e-cargo bike, which is up to 6K, and then adapted cycle, which is fantastic, and it's repayable for over 4 years. The business side is up to 30K, and that's split into 3,000K for an e-bike, 6,000 per bike, per e-cargo bike, and that's also repayable over 4 years. And the business side is interesting because obviously that's really important, especially in cities, for like last mile logistics, kind of replacing vans, larger fleets, just to kind of deal with medieval layouts of places. So yeah, we've seen quite a bit of interest in both of those, but yeah, that's a quick plug for active travel. There you go.
Yeah, nice one. Actually, Simon and Aaron, are you aware of any grants like that in the Republic of Ireland, come to think of it?
I am not, but that's not to say there aren't any.
That's all right. I know that I've kind of sprung that one on you by surprise, but no, it just came up in conversation just before we went live, and I thought actually that's a really good shout. That so
SEAI website would be the place to check for that, but I'm not sure. Yeah,
no problem. Thank you. Very quick question before we move on to the penultimate part of the session. So PCPs and leasing for used EVs, is it possible? Who does it? If so, this question applies to all 3 regions of the Faster project. So PCPs or leases for used EVs, who wants to go first? Nobody wants to touch it.
I can take that.
Yeah, Aaron, take it.
I think on two sides of the business.
Oh, sorry, I may have said Aaron when I meant Jim. There were 2 people. Sorry, Jim, go for it first.
I think we glitched somewhere in the middle there.
No worries. Yeah, Jim, go first, and we'll take it from there.
Yeah. I think on the retail side of our business, we're already offering PCP on electric vehicles. Numbers are pretty small just now, but at any time we do get batches of electric vehicles in, they sell pretty quickly. So that's optimistic for the future. As far as leasing of used EVs is concerned, we don't yet. We don't lease used cars generally, so it's not specific to EVs. So we don't lease used EVs, but we'll certainly sell you used EVs on PCP.
No problem. Same question to Aaron.
Yeah, you can, and LeasePlan do lease used vehicles. Now, to put an age and mileage cap on them, for a couple of reasons. Obviously, we don't want vehicles going out that have excess mileage, because obviously we take them back end of lease and we sell them eventually. But yeah, we do, and we've actually got some EVs that we've done on used lease this year. You know, vehicles that would have gone out maybe 3 or 4 years ago, and we're happy to maybe put them out for 5 or 6 years in total. And that's also open to private and business customers. So we would, we'd have some customers, maybe new customer to us, they need something now. We may have something that's returned, so we may get a used vehicle out to them for 12 months, particularly with availability and things at the moment while they're waiting for their actual new order to come. But certainly, yes, we do lease used vehicles as well.
Perfect. That's really good to know. I genuinely didn't know that was a thing. We do have more polls, but I'm going to very quickly fire on to the next very kind of quick section, which is salary sacrifice, which of course is another way that you can get your hands on a new electric vehicle by leasing it. Who wants to take salary sacrifice? Who specializes in it? I think this might be a straight fight between Aaron and Jim again.
Well, we'll let Aaron go first this time.
Thanks. Yeah, it's kind of a funny one in some regards in Ireland. So salary sacrifice isn't so much billed as the thing. It's more what BIK benefit is there to an employee in taking an electric vehicle. It's kind of grey at the moment around if somebody is using their own vehicle and getting a mileage rate for it. There's not really anything set in stone there. There's a civil servant rate that's been announced, but that's the only rate really that's been touted for the moment. But BIK is really the big one. So we're in for a lot of change in Ireland for BIK from the 1st of January next year. But essentially at the moment, if the open market value of an EV that you're driving is less than 50,000, you pay 0 BIK currently. If there's anything above the 50,000 mark, currently you will pay BIK on that amount, and it's at a 30% rate, so it's quite high. From the 1st of January next year, what they're going to do is take the open market price of your vehicle, reduce it by 35,000 euro, and then whatever is left will be BIK-able. Now that's going to be a tapered scale, so it's 35,000 next year, 20 the following year, and 10 the year after. So it is going to step down. But actually only this week we are doing a bit of an analysis for a client who has a fleet of diesel Volkswagen Passats, and they're getting a bit of kickback from their drivers now that they're going to be paying a lot more BIK next year. The reason being BIK in Ireland next year is going to an emissions-based system as well. So obviously the higher CO2 emission, the higher up the scale you're going to go. They hit us with VRT this year, and it's BIK is getting hit next year. But essentially the entry rate for a low emitting vehicle will be 22.5% from next year, and it will go up as high as 37.5% for a higher emitting vehicle. Obviously your EVs fall into the lowest band, and there's still a mileage reduction built into that. So if you're doing a lot of business mileage, it can drop down as low as 9% as the BIK rate. But just I suppose just go back to that Passat example for a moment. Next year, that Passat example we were looking at is an elegance model, so it's not a special model, it's kind of a low to mid-range model. Wasn't automatic, but the BIK on that is going to be somewhere in the region of 550 to 580 euros a month. Versus if you took something like a Volkswagen ID4 electric, next year it's going to be around 150 euro a month mark. So there's quite a sizable difference there. And even when you get down to the final year, as far as 2026, when essentially that reduction is going to be 0, you're going to be still better off with the electric at that point. It's going to be somewhere around kind of 480 to 500 euros a month. Now, we do have the budget coming at the end of this month, so this may change again. They may change the bands or change around, but as it stands today, that's where we're looking at. And I suppose the other benefit, not just leasing wise, but it probably applies more, is making things easy for the driver. So we used to get a lot of kickback on drivers saying, well, how am I going to pay for my electricity? We've got a good solution now with a partner of ours who we have a one card does all solution. So essentially one card it's actually like a shopping trolley size fob is what we use. That can start and stop at home charge, log the data. We can reimburse the driver for those costs directly on the on the first of the following month. So it's live data. And that same fob can be used to access 90% of the current existing public infrastructure as well.
Brilliant.
So the driver is never out of pocket there, but the company gets a one bill, kind of does all. solution as well.
That is a really neat solution, actually. That is, yeah, it's something that I've seen come up a few times with fleets where, you know, a company car is charged at home, etc. So that's very, very useful. In terms of salary sacrifice in Scotland and by extension Northern Ireland, in terms of the kind of UK schemes, Jim, what are you doing on SalSac at the moment then? And a kind of follow-up question to this would be, how does it compare to a company car, and how does the kind of typical pricing stack up there?
Yeah, like everything, Euan, it depends who you are. As a company car driver, salary sacrifice isn't for me because I'm already driving an electric vehicle. I'm already paying 2% BIK. It's as cheap as it can be. Introducing salary sacrifice into that equation, it's not really to the benefit of the company car driver. However, it might be to the benefit of the business. So we do have some businesses who are looking at the traditional company car plan and saying, right, we're thinking of going electric. We'll maybe switch it to a salary sacrifice scheme. So that's becoming a wee bit more common. But yeah, we offer a UK-wide salary sacrifice arrangement. Fundamentally, a member of staff gives up a chunk of cash from their salary. So let's say somebody's earning 50 grand a year and they give up 10 grand cash. And the way the salary sacrifice works is that if you return that 10 grand to the employee as a non-cash benefit, then they don't pay any income tax on it and they don't pay any national insurance on it. And therefore they can save staggering amounts of money. HMRC regard a salary sacrifice car as a company car. So you therefore have to pay the benefit in kind tax, but because it's such a low rate, that is where you win with salary sacrifice. So you can't wander into a showroom and just say, I want to fund an electric car on salary sacrifice. It's got to be done through your payroll. So your employer has got to set this scheme up for you. But the savings can be staggering. I mean, I was up at Crieff Hydro on Friday doing a presentation for Mercedes. And we were looking at an EQA, and on our personal contract hire rate on a EQA for 3 years, 30,000 miles, you're on around about £900 a month for that car. On a salary sacrifice for a kind of 40-year-old driver staying in Bristol, who's a high UK taxpayer, you're looking at £490 net salary sacrifice. So the savings can be huge. I mean, that's a saving of £15,000 over the course of a 3-year agreement compared to a personal contract hire.
Wow.
So
Yeah.
as you can imagine, it's become very popular. It's not for everybody. You cannot sacrifice salary, for example, below national minimum wage. And employers have got to be careful about things like resignation. So as a leasing company, we would automatically raise an early termination penalty to the employer, but if your employee's left, you're kind of stuck with that cost. So there are various mitigations that we can include within the agreement, but generally speaking, salary sacrifice has become very popular right now, and it's absolutely the best way to fund an electric vehicle if you can convince your employer to go down that route.
Really good shout. Actually, one very quick thing on salary sacrifice, unless I'm mistaken, if you're planning on buying a new house soon, your potential mortgage lender may look at your reduced salary, your actual take-home pay, as being less able to fund the mortgage for a house, despite the fact that you're actually effectively taking home more money because you're getting a huge saving on the car that's being leased to you, through your work. So ironically, mortgage lenders would prefer it in their books if you took home all that money from your work and then spent even more of that money on the car lease personally. So you actually end up with less money overall. And then they say, oh yeah, you're definitely more able to afford this house than if you had more money in your account. It's weird. So double check that. I don't know if that's still the case, but certainly some mortgage lenders were very finicky about it. But fundamentally though, salary sacrifice, as you say, can check out. And when it does, there's big savings to be had. So as we come towards the end of the session and then very quickly head on to Q&A, we can just do a quick kind of round table, quick fire round. So top tips for getting behind the wheel of an EV. So what I'll start things off, what to look for in a used or new EV that you are about to pick up. And I will start the ball rolling with, are both the charging cables included? Not just the type 2 public charging cable, but the so-called granny cable, the one that plugs into your domestic household socket, which gets you out of trouble in emergencies. Less and less use for it these days because of the high number of public charge points and so on, but useful to have just in case. So-called granny cable because it's the one you use when you go around your granny's house because she doesn't have a charger installed. That's genuinely how in EV speak that cable got its name. I don't think anyone knows its official technical name, and that includes a pretty technical guy. So Simon, what else would you look for in a new or a used EV that's right in front of you that you're about to be handed the keys to?
Well, for me, the most important thing is battery health. I mean, and unfortunately, that probably, unless you're looking at a Nissan Leaf, and even if you are, it's not right in front of you. So it's always worth doing some due diligence on that, buying a used EV, because it's the one big mistake you can make if you pick up a car that's got a duff battery. So yeah.
So that's a really good point, because as you mentioned, the original Nissan Leaf had the 12 state of health bars on the dashboard. So it effectively grassed itself up like a wee primary school kid. Here, miss, he's only got 10 bars. But in the case of other EVs that are a bit more secretive about that, how can you tell? Either from a glance or with kind of clever diagnostic tools?
Yeah, I mean, with most other EVs, there really isn't a quick way to do it. You need there are diagnostic tools that you can buy cheaply to do yourself on some cars, like the Renault Zoe and the i3 you can do to some extent. Also, the Ioniq, I believe, has an app that you can use as well. But I mean, a lot of times, if you're buying for a reputable dealer and they can't tell you, I would say walk away. Go and find one that can. If you're dealing with a specialist, then they'll have other tools that can be used to get that information out of the car.
Fair play. And then speaking of reputable dealers, Jim, what would be your top tip for new or used EVs then when you're buying them?
What Simon said, basically. I mean, it's hard to get over the state of health of the battery. It's occupying our minds greatly at the minute. We sell 350,000 cars a year, and the idea of using manufacturer-specific tools to try and find the state of health of a battery is just a nightmare scenario for us. So we want to give our customers confidence in what they're buying. We want to have confidence in the stock that we are buying, and we're working hard behind the scenes to try and figure out a way of doing that at scale. And it's a nightmare, frankly, and it's a major issue for us. So state of health is the key thing. As Simon says, if you don't know the state of health, it's very difficult to put a value in a car.
I would say probably in response to that, if an EV doesn't actually have the kind of the health of the battery on the dashboard somewhere, have a look at its predicted range on a full charge, because it will give you on its kind of guessometer roughly how many miles it will do or kilometers it will do before the battery runs out. And if it's fully charged, you should have a rough idea, I suppose, of its indicative range. And then, speaking to people who know these vehicles inside out, what was their range when it was new, might give you a rough indication. Some are more accurate than others, to be fair, but it's a kind of take it with a pinch of salt sort of thing. Aaron and Elyse, any advance on battery health? Anything else you'd look for with a new or used EV that's in front of you?
Yeah, I suppose from our point of view, we're a lot of the time dealing more with a fleet contact than a driver from our point of view. So we're kind of generally talking about the right vehicle for the right person. A lot of time, employees may be against going for an electric vehicle. They still have that range anxiety thing in their head. They want a car that will do 700, 800, 900 kilometers. When you drill down into it, most of them drivers will do less than 100 kilometers in a day. So now when you drill down into that and you kind of show them the right vehicle for their use, and then the thing after that I would do is get them into one, let them drive it and see what they think of it. I think most people agree once you've driven an EV, you don't want to go back. The whole driving experience is so much nicer. So that would be our thing, right vehicle for the right person, and get people in to try the vehicle as well. or even any EV. One should, I think, try any EV. That would turn a lot of heads, I think.
Great point. And Elyse, to close before we head into the Q&A.
Yeah, I mean, I would echo basically all the points that are already made. I think you could have a whole separate webinar about online remote purchasing. I think absolutely do your due diligence. Definitely, I mean, we're always, Energy Saving Trust is available. We have great resources in our advice centers, so do call us, get in touch with us. We have a lot of good sort of myth busting facts and figures, especially for consumers. I think, Aaron, you made a really good point about the right vehicle for the right customer. Just making sure that the range anxiety thing doesn't sort of take hold too deeply. And just, yeah, getting folks in the vehicles. And it's a similar thing with e-bikes. We have this same thing of like, once you're on e-bike, like you're never going to go back, especially if say you're in Edinburgh, like the Edinburgh Hills, like there's no way. So yeah, I would just echo a lot of the points that were already made.
Brilliant. Thank you so much. And what we'll do is we'll skip forward to the final poll of the evening, Donal, if we may, poll 5. Just before we head into the Q&A. So EV drivers, did you encounter any of the following issues when you were looking to get your EV? So actually note that there's sometimes it could have been like poor dealership knowledge of EVs from from an actual franchise dealer of that vehicle. Did a dealer try to actively dissuade you from buying an EV? Again, new car ones. That normally happens when they don't actually have many EVs to sell, and they're like, oh well, I've got a diesel, and we'll try and put them into that. Poor used car knowledge of EVs, and then basically the various different answers there. Give you 10 more seconds to answer those, and we'll have a look at the poll. That said, actually, the one thing which I should have put as an option was none of the above. In other words, you had a straightforward experience. In other words, just don't answer the poll. Donal, let's have a look at the answers. There we go. So actually, probably more of a legacy thing, but poor dealership knowledge of EVs, that certainly was the case before, but now we're starting to see the big dealers like Arnold Clark proactively kind of jumping headfirst into this and actually educating their staff. This is very promising. But yeah, shortage of stock and long lead times. The demand for electric vehicles is growing exponentially. Supply chains are having to try and catch up. It doesn't exactly help matters that the wiring loom for the Volkswagen ID range of electric cars is made in Ukraine, which of course is going through unspeakable atrocities just now. So there have been some slight delays trying to get parts from factories in that sort of sense. But eventually we should start to see this ease as new factories and new supply routes are built. But we have some excellent questions for the panel, not necessarily related to new or used EVs, but definitely definitely worth kind of covering. So Octopus Electric Universe, sorry, Ron Bagnall says Octopus Electric Universe, or for the artist formerly known as Octopus Electric Juice, that one network fits all card is rapidly gaining momentum. But that's really all we want. We want something where we can just tap the one card that we have and away we go. But Charge Place Scotland is not on board yet. Does anyone know why not? What are the issues? I know the answer to this, but does anyone else want to take it rather than me stealing your thunder? No? Okay, right, cool. So Charge Place Scotland is a decentralized network. Whilst it is all kind of branded as being the same, that's just the back office, the actual nerve center that's running things, that's authorizing charging sessions and then stopping charging sessions and then billing you. But what happens is the people who actually own the infrastructure, the charging infrastructure, that's not Charge Place Scotland. That's hundreds of different organizations, mostly local authorities, but there's also plenty of businesses as well. So if Octopus Electric Juice or Electric Universe was to become a payment method for Charge Place Scotland, there's a very good chance that they would need to agree this with all of the 32 Scottish local authorities and the hundreds of businesses, including Shield Shop, en route to Sky Skins in Sky. Those are just like two random examples of like solitary charge point owners in the middle of nowhere, to agree that this could go through, because it's going to have to require buy-in from the owner as well. And that's why we've not seen that. Charge Place Scotland is quite unique in its structure, and it works to its advantage and sometimes, but other times it can be a bit of a faff like that. Anyone got anything else to add to that from the panel? Nope.
Yeah, I would just say that interestingly, the power card is acceptable to Charge Place Scotland, and I just wonder why, because it's exactly the same. It's an aggregated card. I think power can be used these days at 18,000 or so charge points across the UK. And I don't know why, but I just wonder why power is accepted and Octopus isn't.
You make a great point, actually. I think it might be because power is more kind of business oriented. And I think it was in the run up to the Green Fleet EV rally of Great Britain. There needed to be that kind of one card fits all thing. And I believe that basically got fast tracked through, shall we say, that Charge Place Scotland was not given much of an option in the matter to fast track that one through. I think there's stuff going on behind the scenes there. But yeah, you've made a really good point, because power does exist. It is on the Charge Place Scotland network. In theory, electric juice could be as well. The one that makes it more awkward is something like Bonnet, where it's a single tariff across all charging infrastructure, because Charge Place Scotland itself does not have a single tariff across all of its infrastructure. That makes it just that bit more difficult, because it's up to each host or sorry, each owner to agree, because you've not only got different rates of pence per kilowatt hour, but you've sometimes got connection fees. And you've sometimes got minimum charge amounts and so on, and that makes things a bit more colourful, shall we say, trying to deal with that. Billy Hamilton asks, are there any small electric vans that can be used to tow a trailer? So very good question, especially from the work perspective. Who wants to come flooding in with the answers of those electric vans that are available today that can tow?
Yeah, I can come in there. There are some. Depends what exactly you mean by small, though. A lot of the Opel range, or the Stellantis group, so Peugeot, Citroen, Opel, Fiat, they're all essentially the same vehicle underneath, and they've kind of gone with a philosophy of it doesn't matter which powertrain you buy in the vehicle, all vehicles are equal in capability, so that would also include towing and weight capacity. So they're the brands I would look at, and yes, they should be able to tow.
Excellent. Yeah, I did see the spec sheets for them kind of indicating that they can do this. There are more and more vans coming to the market, and that towing capability, as you say, is getting stronger. There are many electric cars that can tow as well. I'm trying to remember the name of the website. Let me just quickly Google it. It's something like electric cars that can tow. It's a UK website. Oh, come on. Is electrictowcars.co.uk, I think. Yeah, electrictowcars.co.uk. I'll post the link in the chat, and that tells you the EVs that can, there we go, you'll be able to see that now. The EVs that can tow and how much they can tow. Admittedly, that's cars rather than vans, but it gives you an indication of just how much of a workhorse these vehicles are becoming. Very quickly, Donal, is the Zoom recording about to run out of time? Is it complaining at all, or has it still got a couple of minutes left?
Nope, we're good to go for another few minutes.
Excellent. Superb. Well, in that case, hopefully, Billy, we have answered your question for you. The last question that we have at the moment, if anyone else has more, then please do jump in. But this is a very sore topic from today, literally just announced this afternoon. So Peter McCree says, today we've been informed that Osprey are moving to raise their the tariff that they charge you for charging on their rapid chargers to £1 per kilowatt hour. Does the panel believe that this is going to be the norm in the coming months for all rapid charger networks?
Probably. I think in the short term, it's very likely that we're going to keep seeing prices going up. I mean, it's not, this is not Osprey or any other operator being opportunistic or trying to gouge on prices. This is them reacting to their costs and trying to stay in business. Unfortunately, energy prices are a mess.
And I'll jump in here because I've been doing a lot of sleuthing on energy prices recently. Basically, what we have at the moment in the UK is a government that has been utterly incompetent in the way that it has handled the global wholesale gas price. If you look at nations across Europe, the price rises, there have been price rises on energy bills, but they've been a fraction of what they've been in the UK. So what we have at the moment is obviously the wholesale price of gas has shot through the roof because of the war in Ukraine, because of Russia's invasion. And that means obviously that there's a lot of gas that was previously coming into Europe, which is now not, either for political reasons on the European side or on the Russian side. That means obviously there's only so much gas to go about, and the gas that there is therefore more expensive. But that's gas rather than electricity. However, in the UK, a lot of our electricity, but not all of it, comes from gas. So I reckon there's probably about 30 to 40% of the UK as a whole's electricity will come from gas-fired power plants. So in essence, the wholesale price of gas is affecting the wholesale price of electricity. So what you have in the wholesale electricity market is all of the different generators, whether they're wind or hydro, nuclear, coal, whatever, they all bid to provide a certain amount of electricity in every kind of half-hour window at which this price will kind of vary. And they will say, well, I'll sell you this electricity, this much, for this many pence per kilowatt hour. Now, what we have is obviously, the cost of renewable energy hasn't gone up, but whatever the most expensive bidder is sets the wholesale price, the marginal price that's paid to everyone else in the wholesale electricity market. So you've got the likes of BP, Shell and Centrica who are extracting gas from the North Sea. The cost of extracting that gas hasn't gone up, but the global wholesale price has. So they're making an obscene amount of money when they sell that at the global wholesale price to a gas-fired power plant that buys it at that extortionate rate, then has to sell it with a tiny profit to stop themselves going bust. That sets the wholesale price of electricity, which at the moment, of course, is through the roof. Your domestic electricity, or Osprey's commercial electricity provider, then has to buy wholesale electricity at that extortionate price and then sell it possibly at a loss, possibly at a tiny profit. That's why so many electricity providers have gone bust recently. They're not the ones raking it in. It's the big oil and gas companies who are extracting that gas in the first place that are raking it in. They then sell that to Osprey, who then are faced with a double whammy of extortionately high wholesale prices, 60, 70, maybe 80 pence per kilowatt hour. They then have to add on VAT at 20%. The electricity you pay for at home only has 5% VAT on it, but in the UK, public electricity is at 20%. This is something that the likes of Instavolt has been lobbying very hard to try and get reduced to improve social equality for people who cannot charge at home and are reliant on public charging networks. But that is in place. They then have to pay a little bit, they have to add obviously a tiny bit to cover the costs of their staff. Osprey, this is, they need to add a little bit to cover the cost of the ground rent for where they've put their chargers, because obviously they don't own that land. They're renting it from, say, Marston's pubs and all these places they're putting them in. That's where that £1 per kilowatt hour is coming from. They are not deliberately ripping you off. They do not enjoy doing this. And the same applies to all other charging networks who are charging way more than they were this time last year. This could be easily resolved by stopping gas from setting the wholesale price of electricity. Split it out, stop it setting that marginal price, pay out whatever stupid amount of money it requires, but then let the next highest bidder set the wholesale price that's paid to everyone else. That instantly reduces the cost of wholesale electricity by several tens of pence per unit. So that's, you probably brought Osprey down to 50, 60 pence per kilowatt hour. Then what you can do is you can apply a windfall tax on oil and gas, because they were already making plenty of money off of gas at the wholesale price a year, 18 months ago. So anything on top of that is just an immorally high, obscene amount of money. That could then be used by a competent government to cover the cost of wholesale electricity and gas as well, to stop people shivering to death in their homes, bringing the costs down to near enough what they were before. That's by and large what we've seen in most other countries in Europe, apart from Estonia and the UK. I'll get off my soapbox now, but I hope that's given you an indication of how the energy market is working, how it's broken at the moment, and how it could be fixed. So, thank you very much. I hope that was useful. And it's very difficult to avoid mentioning politics on this, because it is a political decision, because really when it comes to reforming that market, it requires Westminster to actually make that call. This is, we need this reform and we need it now. At the moment, what they've done is they've basically handed it, like, see with the domestic price cap, they've just handed a blank check to BP, Shell and Centrica, who are already making, like, the only companies making any profit in this by some margin. They are effectively sitting atop a pile of dead poor people who shiver to death this winter, which is the only way to put it, really. Is blatant daylight robbery. They've just handed them a blank check, and by the way, the taxpayer is going to be paying back that for God knows how long. If it was a windfall tax, then they would pick up the bill. They're not going to miss that money, and it means that people can actually afford to charge their car, to heat their house, to switch on a light bulb. So anyway, it's a sore point. I really hope that the government actually steps in and takes reasonable guidance and reasonable measures on this. So Peter, I hope that's answered your question. We have an anonymous attendee. Could Donald tell us how many public chargers are working in his hometown? This is an interesting one, Donald.
Yeah, I was just actually looking at that myself today, because again, somebody had asked the question. And unfortunately, it seems that all currently available chargers in Enniskillen are all offline or unavailable, which is a really, really poor situation. And I suppose is representative of a lot of towns and villages across Northern Ireland at the minute. As we know, the vast majority of the infrastructure currently available is through e-cars. And we know that they have the levelling up funding, which was announced late last year. So hopefully there are efforts and plans in place to make improvements on that existing network. And again, this is where the faster infrastructure will come in very useful next year. But at the minute, it's a really poor situation locally for EV users. And I don't think there's really anything else that can be said at the minute, apart from that. It is, I know from speaking to local EV drivers that depend on the public charging network, that it's just a nightmare. I live across the border in Donegal, and I've actually just ordered my own home charger, and hopefully having that installed over the next few weeks. And I was applied actually for the SEI grant, which we spoke about earlier. So it's great to have that facility in the Republic of Ireland. And I've also recently placed an order for one of the new MG4s. So looking forward to joining the ranks of the EV drivers out there. So
welcome aboard.
In another few months, I'll either be sharing in those frustrations with you all, or extolling the benefits of the electric vehicle. So, going back to the original question, it's really unfortunate the situation locally in Enniskillen at the moment, but it is, it does seem to be replicated across Northern Ireland. And I know Mark and the members of EVA NI will, be able to tell you the same thing. And I know they're lobbying government and the Department for Infrastructure very strongly. And we also recently did see the announcement from the NI EV consortium that they will be installing 124 of the 22 kilowatt on-street charge points. And again, that will help things along a little bit as well. But it's just, it really can't come quickly enough for current motorists. And until we get the network sorted, I think we're definitely in a sort of a limbo position here.
Well, thank you for your honesty on that one. My understanding is that ESB e-cars are replacing their older unreliable rapid chargers with something a bit more, a bit more reliable. But I think that, obviously the progress is being made there. Perhaps it could be faster. But incidentally, we will have a separate webinar on EV charging infrastructure in Northern Ireland, and the panelist lineup for that just now is looking very impressive. We've got major stakeholders across the public and private sector. That is going to be during business hours. So that is going to be at 11 a.m. on Wednesday, the 7th of December, just so you know. So that's EV charging infrastructure in Northern Ireland. I'm aware that it's a very contentious topic, a very heated topic. So if you're watching this and you want to find out more and you want to put your questions to the powers that be, book that morning off and do join us live for the webinar, which of course will be recorded and shared online afterwards on the Faster YouTube channel. Mark McCall, of course, head of EVA NI, quite rightly says, with regards to your answer there, Donald, that he hopes that the past performance like this, the situation we've got, #Enniskillengate, will be taken into account during the tender for the Faster Project's Northern Irish infrastructure, and certainly I hope so too. So yeah, I think that is all of the questions that we have from you. And certainly I would disagree with Gordon McCrae in the chat there. If you live in Northern Ireland, buy a small petrol car. The MG4 that's coming out is a quote unquote affordable EV. If you look at the cost of a brand new petrol Focus, I would certainly say that the MG4 EV is a very affordable car in comparison. And the range of that is an easy 200 plus miles per charge for the base model, if I recall correctly. So you'd easily get about Northern Ireland if you have the facility to charge at home, which I believe that 80% of people in Northern Ireland do. As for off-street charging, as you alluded to, there are, the local authorities are finally starting to take advantage of funding that's available, and we're also seeing some interesting movers in the private sector too. As I said, December's webinar is going to be fascinating, so do join us for that. But definitely, there's an EV is still viable, but we could really do with more infrastructure in Northern Ireland. And as you said, Donald, that's what the Faster project's all about, trying to help people out when you've got places to be, being able to give you a quick top up and get on your way, and hopefully spur investment in more infrastructure. But yeah, there's a lot of interesting reasons why Northern Ireland's rollout hasn't been as widespread as it has in Scotland or indeed in the Republic of Ireland. But I've kept all of you wonderful panelists and audience here long enough. Thank you so much for your time as always, and for the wisdom of everyone on the panel tonight. As I say, Simon, Aaron, Jim, and Elyse, great to have you on. Thank you. You've all been hugely informative.
Thank you.
You've certainly taught us an awful lot. The next time we will hopefully see you is another one during business hours. That is going to be, let me just scroll to the right bit. Yeah, 19th of October, Wednesday, 19th of October at 11 a.m. This one's going to be EV charging infrastructure in the Republic of Ireland. So yeah, obviously a bit of a better situation than in Northern Ireland at the moment, but one of the regions of the Faster project with some very interesting developments in recent years. That's going to be another fascinating webinar. Join us at 11 a.m. Wednesday, 19th of October to talk business and talk tech about the past, present and future of the Republic of Ireland's EV charging infrastructure. Thank you again to our panelists and to all of you for watching, either live or indeed on YouTube. See you next time. Take care.